I used to think peace had a sound. For me, it was the slow hush of pine trees leaning into the wind, the creak of the old porch swing, and my grandmother's laughter echoing through the cabin she built with her own hands. That cabin was supposed to be my inheritance, not because of money, but because she said I understood what it meant to care for something. When she passed, the world went quiet. I told myself that one day I'd bring life back to that mountain, restore the place that raised me. I had no idea that promise would become the reason my heart would break twice, once for family and once for betrayal. It started the day my cousin Becca called. Her voice was syrupy, soft in a way it only got when she wanted something. "Autumn," she said, "I've been thinking, what if we finally fixed up Grandma's cabin together?" I hesitated. Becca and I hadn't been close since she moved to the city and reinvented herself as a lifestyle influencer. Her world was marble countertops and brand deals. Mine was night shifts and nursing scrubs. Still, something in her tone, nostalgic, almost tender, pulled me in. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe hope. So I agreed. We met at the cabin 2 weeks later. It was early spring, snow still clinging to the peaks, the creek thawing in slow silver ribbons. She arrived in a brand new SUV that didn't belong on a dirt road, dressed like she was about to film a commercial. I came with a toolbox and memories. The first few days were good, almost peaceful. We sanded floors, argued over paint colors, and laughed about Grandma's ancient wallpaper. Becca filmed short clips for her followers, calling it the Heirloom Restoration Project. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing cracks. Subtle, creeping. She began using phrases like "my vision for the cabin" and "my future retreat." The first time I heard it, I brushed it off. By the third, it settled in my gut like ice. One night, after a long day of work, I found her in the living room flipping through old papers. Deeds, tax receipts, Grandma's handwritten notes. "Are you looking for something?" I asked. "Just trying to organize," she said, flashing that smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. Something told me not to press, but I did, and that was my mistake. A few weeks later, she said she needed to head back to Denver for a business. She left early the next morning. When I called her days later, her number went straight to voicemail. I figured she was busy. Then one night, scrolling through social media, I froze. There she was, standing in front of our cabin, smiling for a camera crew, a shiny new banner behind her that read, "Becca Lane Wellness Retreat, grand opening soon." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My throat tightened. I called her again. No answer. That was the moment the piece I'd been holding on to cracked in half. I drove up to the mountain the next morning, my hands shaking around the steering wheel. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. When I reached the clearing, my stomach dropped. The cabin was surrounded by cars, luxury sedans, film vans, people everywhere holding champagne flutes and laughing. The porch where Grandma and I once shared cocoa now had string lights and a neon sign spelling Becca's Sanctuary. She saw me before I even stepped out of the car. Her expression flickered. Shock, then annoyance, then something colder. She walked over in heels that sunk into the gravel. "Autumn, you made it," she said, bright enough for the cameras. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "It's my business launch. Our project went viral, so I decided to expand." "Our project?" I repeated. Before I could finish, someone called her name from the porch. Ryan, her boyfriend, the one who always wore success like perfume. He raised a glass toward her, to Becca, the owner of the dream. The words hit harder than I expected. Owner. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. My cousin smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that slices through skin. "You're being dramatic," she whispered. "It's just a name. You get so emotional about property." When I tried to step inside, a security guard blocked the door. My voice broke. "That's my grandmother's cabin. You can't." Becca laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, Autumn, you really should check the paperwork before making claims." She waved toward a folder on the table inside. My name was gone, replaced with hers. Something inside me collapsed and burned all at once. I didn't scream. I just stood there, frozen, until a woman I recognized from the next property leaned close and whispered, "You're not the first one she's done this to." Before I could ask what she meant, Becca called out, "Security, get her things, please." Moments later, my suitcase landed on the porch with a dull thud. As I turned to leave, she leaned against the railing and smiled for the cameras again, perfect and untouchable. I could hear her laughter as I walked to my car. That night, I drove down the mountain road with tears blurring my vision. The lights of her party faded in the rearview mirror, but the sound of her voice stayed, echoing, mocking. I swore I would never go back. But what I didn't know then was that Becca's perfect life was already starting to crumble. When I reached Denver that night, I didn't even go home. I parked in front of my friend Kara's place, sat in the car until the engine clicked quiet, and cried until my chest hurt. The city lights outside the windshield looked like they were melting. Kara didn't ask many questions. She just handed me a blanket and pointed toward her guest room. "Stay as long as you need," she said. I spent the first few days in silence. My phone buzzed with messages from friends who'd seen Becca's launch video, hundreds of comments praising her vision, her heartwarming family project. Each one felt like another small cut. At night, I'd work extra shifts at the hospital to drown the noise. I'd walk sterile halls under fluorescent lights, patching other people's wounds while mine kept bleeding inside. Between shifts, I scrolled through Becca's posts, each one more glamorous than the last. She was doing interviews, magazine spreads, sponsorship deals. Every smile looked like it was carved from my loss. One evening, during a rare break, a patient's husband was watching the local news in the waiting area. I wasn't paying attention until I heard her name. Local influencer Becca Lane's fiancé, Ryan Carter, has been taken into custody for multiple counts of financial fraud. I froze, coffee halfway to my lips. The reporter continued. Authorities allege he used Becca Lane's name to open several shell accounts tied to luxury purchases and false investments. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I turned toward the screen just in time to see a clip of Becca crying outside a courthouse, cameras flashing. Something strange stirred inside me. Not joy exactly, but release. Like the mountain air after a thunderstorm. That night, I lay awake replaying the news report. Ryan had been arrested. Becca was tangled in scandal. All the perfect things she'd built were starting to crack. I whispered into the dark. It wasn't justice yet, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe fate wasn't done. Maybe Becca was finally going to face the kind of truth she'd always dodged. One afternoon, while organizing my grandmother's old documents, what little I had left, I came across her will again. The part about the cabin was simple. For Autumn who knows the value of things that grow slowly. I read it 3 times before closing my eyes. That's when it clicked. Becca had stolen something that was never really meant for her. But maybe I didn't have to destroy her to get it back. Maybe all I had to do was let her keep doing what she did best, building her empire on lies, and help the cracks widen. I looked at the photo on my nightstand, Grandma smiling in front of the cabin, and whispered, "I'll fix this, my way." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain didn't fade, but it sharpened into focus. Because revenge, I realized, doesn't always start with rage. Sometimes it begins with clarity. It started with a headline. A few weeks after Ryan's arrest, I saw it. Local influencer lists iconic mountain cabin for sale amid legal troubles. The photo in the article made my stomach twist. There it was, my cabin, staged with white furniture and gold decor, stripped of everything warm and human. The listing price was obscene. And at the bottom of the article was Becca's smiling photo, pretending none of this chaos existed. I stared at that image for a long time before saying out loud,
"You're selling my home to clean up your mess." And that's when the idea took root. I didn't plan to storm in and expose her. Not yet. I wanted her to feel the floor sink under her feet, inch by inch, until she realized there was nothing left to stand on. So I started small. I called an old colleague, Mason, who worked with the real estate firm handling Becca's listing. We'd shared a few overnight shifts at the hospital before he switched careers. I told him I was just curious about the sale, that I'd once been interested in the property when it was under the Clark name. He didn't ask questions. He just gave me the agent's number. Her name was Elise. I arranged a coffee meeting, wearing the calmest smile I could muster. I told her I was a potential buyer, looking for a quiet place in the mountains, maybe something with a bit of family history. She was friendly, chatty, eager to please. By the time our lattes were gone, I knew more about the cabin's current situation than Becca probably did. Apparently, Becca was desperate to sell. The septic system wasn't up to current codes, and the local inspector had already issued warnings she ignored to rush the remodel. That little detail was my spark. That night, using a private browser, I submitted an anonymous complaint to the county's environmental board. I described the septic issue, added details only someone who'd lived there would know. Within a week, a notice was posted online. Property sale frozen, pending investigation. I didn't celebrate. I just watched quietly as the first domino fell. 2 days later, Becca's perfect Instagram feed started showing cracks. "Unforeseen delays," she wrote under a photo of herself pretending to sip coffee by the cabin window. In the comments, sponsors started asking questions. Buyers pulled out. And that was just the beginning. While she panicked, I drove back to the mountain, just to see. Some of the locals still remembered me. Mr. Hayes, who ran the gas station, Mrs. Leary, who used to sell honey by the roadside. Becca had rubbed them all the wrong way with her influencer attitude. When they realized who I was, their tone softened. "About time someone came back who cared about the place," Mr. Hayes said. I didn't tell them my plan, but every small conversation stitched me a little closer to that town again. It stopped being a place of loss and started feeling like home, waiting to be reclaimed. Then, one night, my phone rang. Becca. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Her voice was small, panicked, nothing like the confident woman from her videos. "Autumn, I don't know who else to call. Everything's falling apart. The buyers pulled out, the county froze the sale, and Ryan's lawyers are demanding restitution." I said nothing. Finally, she added, "You still know people in that town, right? Maybe you could talk to someone?" I took a slow breath. I can see what I can do. That was my first real victory. She didn't even realize she was asking her target for help. Over the next week, I helped her line up a new buyer, someone who seemed eager and sympathetic. In reality, that buyer was a contact from Mason's circle, an investigative reporter working on a story about fraudulent property transfers and influencer tax evasion. When Becca called me again, she sounded relieved. "You're the only one I can trust right now." I almost laughed. "Don't worry, Becca," I said softly. "Everything is going to come to light soon." And it did. The reporter set up interviews, pretending to be a buyer. Becca bragged, exaggerated, and slipped. She used my grandmother's name, on record. Within weeks, whispers spread. Then headlines followed. But I didn't rush it. I wanted her to feel safe one last time before it all came crashing down. So I sent her a text. Things have a way of coming full circle, don't they? She replied with a single word. "What?" I didn't answer. Because she was about to find out. And when she did, it wouldn't be through me. It would be through the same people she'd always tried to impress. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I could almost hear Grandma's voice again. "Patience, Autumn. Even mountains crumble in time." I smiled for the first time in months. because Becca thought she could twist every rule to her favor. I just showed her what happens when the rules twist back.
The story broke on a gray Monday morning. I was at work when Mason sent me the link with a simple message. You might want to see this. The headline read, "Influencer's Mountain Cabin Under Investigation for Fraudulent Transfer." Becca's picture was right beneath it, that carefully curated smile, the one she practiced for every brand deal, now framed between words like fraud, property scam, and investigation. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just sat there for a long time, the coffee on my desk going cold. After months of swallowing silence, it felt like finally exhaling. Within hours, the story spread everywhere. Local outlets picked it up first, then regional ones, then gossip blogs that lived off influencer drama. Becca tried to control the damage, issued a statement calling it a misunderstanding. But screenshots of her messages, her staged renovation photos, her fake business claims, they were all out now. Sponsors dropped her, collaborations vanished, her follower count plummeted by the thousands every hour. And I didn't have to lift a finger. Ryan's trial only made it worse. When the prosecution released financial records, they showed that several of his fake accounts had been registered under Becca's name. Whether she knew or not didn't matter. Legally, she was entangled. The last time I saw her online, she posted a teary video from her car, saying she'd been betrayed by everyone she trusted. I almost said, "Welcome to the club." Weeks later, I found out the cabin was being repossessed. Becca was trying to sell it quietly to pay restitution for Ryan's sentence. The price had dropped by half. That's when I made my final move. Through a shell LLC, a small company name no one would trace to me, I bought it. Cash. The very same home that had once been stolen from me was mine again. But I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. There was still one thing left unfinished. So I drove back up that mountain. It was early morning, fog curling around the trees, the cabin barely visible through the mist. Becca's car sat in the driveway, trunk open, boxes scattered on the porch. She didn't hear me first. She was sitting on the steps, head in her hands, staring at the snow like she was waiting for it to answer her. When she finally looked up, her face went pale. "Autumn." "Becca?" I stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "Didn't expect to see me." She blinked fast, her voice shaking. "They said the new owner was coming to inspect the place. I didn't know it was you." "Well," I said softly, "surprise." She looked smaller than I remembered, makeup-free, tired, defeated. "You wanted to ruin me, didn't you?" I tilted my head. "No, Becca, you did that yourself. I just gave fate a little nudge." Her mouth trembled. "You don't understand. Ryan lied to me. He said the cabin would be safe, that it was temporary. I didn't mean for any of this." I cut her off gently. "You meant to take what wasn't yours. Everything after that was just consequence." She looked around the cabin, eyes glistening. "It used to be beautiful," she whispered. "It still is, but not the kind of beauty you can photograph." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Snow started to fall again, quiet and steady. I could hear the soft ticking of her car's cooling engine, the same sound I'd heard the night she threw me out. She said, "I don't know how to fix any of this. Maybe start by admitting what you broke." She looked at me, then, really looked, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Shame, maybe, or clarity. She said, "I lost everything." I nodded. Sometimes that's the only way to find what's real. I turned to leave, but she called after me. "You hate me, don't you?" I stopped. The answer should have been easy, but it wasn't. "I did," I said quietly, "but not anymore." "Why not?" "Because hating you kept me tied to the worst version of myself, and I'm done living there." When I got into my car and looked in the mirror, I saw her still standing in the snow, watching. Just like I once had,
alone on that same porch, suitcase in hand. Except this time, the door she stood by wasn't hers anymore. As I drove up the mountain road, sunlight broke through the clouds, cutting across the trees in streaks of gold. I rolled down the window, the cold air stinging my face. For the first time, it didn't feel like running away. It felt like coming home. Because Becca had taken my peace once, but this time, I'd taken it back, piece by piece, until there was nothing she could touch. And as the cabin disappeared behind me, I whispered into the wind, "Some lessons hurt, but the ones that scar you, those are the ones that stick." When the dust finally settled, I went back to the cabin. It was quiet, stripped of all the noise that used to echo from Becca's parties. The gold curtains were gone, the marble counters replaced with the rough wood I'd once sanded myself. I was rebuilding it, piece by piece, trying to remember what peace used to sound like. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes I'd rescued from storage, I found an old tin tucked beneath my grandmother's quilts. Inside were brittle papers, letters folded with the neat precision she was known for. Most were dated years before she passed. One envelope caught my eye. "For whoever holds this cabin with love, not greed." I opened it with trembling hands. The words inside stopped my breath. Grandma had never wanted the property tied to the family trust. She'd left it solely to me. Her only request was that I restore it with care. But there was more. Attached was a copy of an old deed and a note from her lawyer. The transfer had been forged years ago, right after Grandma's stroke. The signatures were my aunts and uncles, Becca's parents. They had shifted ownership quietly to the family trust, giving Becca control after they died. It wasn't just Becca's greed, it was a legacy. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the papers while the wind whispered against the cabin walls. The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. Becca hadn't started the rot, she'd inherited it. That night, I drove into town to see my mother. We hadn't spoken much since the fight. She hated confrontation and always said, "Family matters have a way of fixing themselves." But I needed answers. She was sitting on the porch, knitting, like nothing had changed. When I showed her the papers, she sighed. Not surprised, not shocked, just tired. She said, "I knew your aunt did something, but every time I tried to fight her, your grandmother begged me to stop. She didn't want another war in the family." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "Because I wanted you to have peace." Her eyes glistened. "Your aunt taught Becca that taking what isn't yours is power. I taught you the opposite. Maybe both of us failed." I didn't know what to say. The truth wasn't comforting. It was heavy. But somewhere in that weight, something shifted. I realized Becca was just a mirror of the people who raised her. She'd grown up watching betrayal win. I'd grown up believing love was enough to stop it. Maybe we were both wrong. When I drove back up the mountain, the night air felt cleaner somehow. The cabin lights glowed through the trees, soft and warm. For the first time since that night she threw me out, I didn't feel anger rising in my chest. Revenge had given me clarity, but forgiveness, that was what finally gave me peace. As I stood on the porch, I thought of something Grandma once said. "This cabin will reveal the true heart of anyone who sets foot in it." She was right. It revealed mine, and Becca's, and the painful truth that sometimes revenge isn't the opposite of forgiveness. It's the path that leads you there.